stop waiting for other people to give you permission to do things. You just need to do it. And I think that's one thing I had to figure out the hard way in terms of starting these businesses was stop waiting for other people to tell you that it's a good idea. Stop waiting for permission. Just if you know it's important to you and you're inspired by the thought of it, go do it.
You are now listening to the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, best-selling author of the book Stay the Course, and Maxwell Leadership Certified Team Member, Dom Brightman. And you're going to be getting some tips and techniques to advance yourself up next. Today's episode is sponsored by book number 2 from Dominic Dom Brightman, Stay the Course, The Elite Performer's 7 Secret Keys to Sustainable Success. It is the field guide to help unleash the elite performer that is inside of you. Cop it today on Amazon.com or heading over to dombrightman.com and snag it in book, ebook, and audio book, so that way you can take it on the go and get yourself on the go to your northbound success. And today on the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, known as GMP, the Great, Glorious, and Glamorous, it's the Going North podcast, and we got another super special, awesome human for you today, all the way from the great country of Japan, baby. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Yes, indeed, I believe, third guest from Japan, off the top of my head, I believe. So this is going to be great. And funny enough, my man's journey originally started in America, but he could probably share more about that because, my goodness, today's guest in particular is a Shochu and awamori expert, as well as a best-selling author and a fellow podcast host as well as a lover of baseball indeed. So let's give it up for the CP Not 3, Christopher Pellegrini. How you doing today, Chris?
Very good, Dom. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Yes, indeed. As the Les Brown would say, a plum please and pleasure. All the plums getting pleasure today, y'all.
Oh, jeez. We're starting with fire here. I like it. All right. I'm picking up what you're throwing down, Dom. Keep it going. This is good.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, my goodness, man, as with all introductions, they're not allowed to be 77.5 days long, and I'm pretty sure I forgot a whole bunch of stuff and how my man ended up in Japan. So, was it like a chloroform, like potato sack you woke up in, like Kyushu, or like how did that happen, man?
No, I got dragged over here by a girl, and when I say dragged, I went incredibly willingly. But boy meets girl, and girl decides she wants to live in Japan for a year. So boy said, "Hey, that sounds fine to me," and that was in 2002, and we are still here. So it's been an unexpected journey. It has been a wonderful 20 years of just constant discovery, and I'm incredibly grateful for the 20 years younger me for just going with the flow, because, you know, it's funny how life can just unfurl out in front of you without really any clear direction from the start. And then a few years in, you're like, oh, geez, I'm glad that we made this decision.
Oh, yeah, that's right indeed. So inspired to want to move to Japan. Like, was she originally Japanese herself, or?
Oh, no, actually, we met while I was working in academia in Korea. She's a Korean national, and she taught herself to speak Japanese, was always a fan, ended up getting a job at the Japanese consulate in Busan, and then really wanted to have some international experience. And Japan was because of her amazing Japanese language ability, was the best first step for that. And yeah, like I said, 2002, that was when we made the trip over, and we haven't looked back. Every year is another couple of steps in the right direction. We've got great friends, we've got jobs that we love. So we're now, well, geez, 20 years and a green card. I mean, we're lifers essentially.
That's right indeed. Lifers, baby, lifers. That's right, they suck you in good.
Yeah, they've got us here, and whether they like it or not, to be perfectly honest with you, but we do. We're blessed. We have great community, and we've got just. I think importantly, obviously, is that the job situation is such that we are look forward to starting the day. And I don't know if you can ask for a whole lot more than that. Family's a little far away. That's the one huge downside. But you know, you just gotta roll with the flow. You just gotta take those punches and keep getting back up. And I think we've been able to do that as a small unit team. And I'm like I said, I'm incredibly grateful that I was flexible enough in my approach to my own future to just take the chance.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. All the yoga swag, indeed. The flexibility, baby. That's right, indeed.
This is gonna turn into a Lululemon promo here.
Hey, I'm just saying that's a gift to the world right there. That's a gift to the world. Guys know why, and I'm not going to go any deeper into that. But my goodness, so man, so with
I'm nodding knowingly over here.
oh man, oh my goodness. So speaking of jobs, man, so I'm pretty sure you didn't start off in the wonderful spirits business. I'm pretty sure you had a job before that that probably led you into that, man. So how was that whole transition process?
You're right, Dom. I was not in spirits from the start, but I was in beer from a very young age. I was making beer in my in my bedroom closet well before I was probably legally allowed to do so. And after my parents found out about that and got pretty upset about it, I parlayed that experience into a kind of a, I guess you could call it an apprenticeship of sorts at the local microbrewery, which is called Otter Creek, and it's in Middlebury, Vermont. And it was there that, after some rather unfortunate circumstances unfolded for the brewery itself, that I was able to step in as the youngest commercial beer brewer in the United States. And that was when I was still a teenager. So I was too young to legally drink what I was making. And that was the beginning of the rabbit hole for me. The rabbit hole being this really intense appreciation and passion for small batch, backbreakingly difficult to make beverage alcohol, beer in that case, that people would line up to fill their growlers with. And that was something that made me very proud. That was something that I was really interested in learning more about. I loved the challenge of trying to make something taste pretty much identical with every batch in every season of every year. And it was what really informed my intense appreciation for Japanese spirits after moving over here. And I know it might seem to a lot of people out there, especially wine and beer drinkers who maybe don't dabble so much in spirits, they're like, well, how does one lead necessarily to the other? And the answer in this case is Japanese shochu and awamori are made on such a micro level in most cases for most of the distilleries that there are serious synergies between the small batch beer that I was making before and the small batch spirits that I spend all of my time trying to teach people about. So it's it was a long-term process. I guess I've been in the alcohol industry in one form or another since I was 16. So yeah, and now I'm trying to teach people about spirits that they've never heard of, but that have, I believe, I guess you could call them, these spirits are the craft beer of the spirits world.
Sweet. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So from moonshine to crescent moonshine. That's what I'm talking about,
Mm.
indeed.
Upper shelf moonshine, top shelf
Ah,
moonshine.
yes, indeed. And you're definitely right about that, man. Because actually, like, thanks to Podmatch and checking out your profile, listen to some of your past stuff. Like usually, mostly of what I'm familiar with, I guess, thanks to the marketing. Everything else is like, if you think of like spirits or alcohol or whatever from Japan, it's like, oh, they probably just got alcohol or whatever, and of course sake, they call it that. But it's like, oh no, it's like there's actually the other two, the shochu and awamori. So like, what led to that discovery of just those two different spirits, and what's the major difference between, I guess, the three? I would say.
I came over here without knowing the words shochu or awamori. They were not words that were ever uttered in my general facility or in my general direction before moving to Japan in 2002. And I actually ran into them in what I think you could probably call was a sake izakaya, or a sake gastropub, a really small one person operation that had a decent, at least as far as I could tell, a decent sake collection. And I, a couple nights a week when we first moved here, would go there and just try and learn more about sake, because that's what I thought of as being Japan's national drink. And honestly, I had extraordinarily terrible experiences with sake in the States. I mean, some of the skunked stuff that I was served because nobody knew how to handle it was enough for me and my friends in college to call it dirty feet. It was appallingly bad. So I came to Japan thinking, okay, I'm going to have to be very careful with my choices over here. But I was, of course, disabused of that notion. I learned very quickly that sake, when handled correctly and when served appropriately, is absolutely amazing. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. Now, one day, the guy at this place was bored. I didn't speak any Japanese at the time either, and that's an important note. So we were kind of doing a lot of gesturing, and I was using as much Japanese as I could cobble together, and he really didn't try at all to speak English. So he one day just pushed some barley shochu in front of me, and that was the beginning. Because yeah, I think he was just trying to mess with me a little bit. Gave me a barley shochu. I was like, "Oh, this is not sake." He's like, "No, it's not sake. It's shochu. Drink it." So I sipped it. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then he gave me a sweet potato shochu, and then he gave me I can't remember if it was rice or if it was kokuto sugar shochu. Then he gave me a soba shochu, which is buckwheat, and they were all radically different. They're all clear, but they were completely different drinks. And I was just like, how are these? You keep calling it all shochu, but they're all completely different. How are they all the same thing? And he didn't know. He's like, "What? I don't know. This is a sake place. What do I know?" I'm like, "Well, you're giving me this stuff. Like, tell me what is going on here. This is crazy." So that was kind of the beginning of what. And I'm just the type of person who, when they become really curious about something, there's really no stopping me. I'm going to figure it out. So there wasn't any information in 2002 about these drinks, or at least no English language information. So I went directly to the source, and I started befriending distillers and the staff, and started sitting in on like study groups with the different, when the different makers get together and they try to help each other, and they try to deproblematize things, specifically trying to find out how to crack the foreign market. But that was the beginning of me really eventually changing my entire career to focus on these drinks. And what are these drinks? Sake, which everybody knows, or most people will know, is a brewed alcoholic beverage made only from rice. And typically it'll have a bottled alcohol by volume, or ABV, of somewhere between, we're going to say 13 to 17%. It's kind of a big range, but that's where most of the product falls. And it tends, at least the stuff that charges the highest price points, tends to have ginjo, Ginjo qualities and aromas. And those can be very tropical fruit oriented, such as pineapple and mango. And then you can have some pear and some green apple in there, bubble gum and cotton candy. And as well as dairy components like yogurt and nuttiness and a whole bunch of other things. And it's a really nice experience. And it's It's one of Japan's so-called kokushu, Kokushu, which means national drinks. Now, there's two other kokushu though, and those are shochu and awamori. I've already mentioned several different types of shochu, several different ingredients, and that's the crazy thing about this category of spirit. It can be made from 53 different approved ingredients. So it's probably the most diverse spirits class in the world. And then awamori, which is really only made in Okinawa, which is Japan's most southwesterly prefecture, which stretches from southern Kyushu almost all the way over to Taiwan. And well, that's not true. Sorry, the Amami Islands are in there. So those are part of Kagoshima. But anyways, there's this ribbon or necklace of islands that stretches all the way southwest. And Okinawa is a massive part of that. And that's where awamori is made. And kind of like sake, it's only made from rice. But there are some big differences between them. Sake is a brewed beverage and awamori is a spirit. Shochu and awamori are not quite as old as sake because sake doesn't require, it's like beer and it's like wine. You don't need a whole lot of crazy machinery to do distillation. So those alcohol traditions have been around much longer. Shochu and awamori production in Japan only started, I mean, it's quite a long time, around 600 years ago, we believe. And when distillation technology entered the country through trade, that's when mostly farmers, mostly people at home figured out, hey, you know what? If I distill an alcoholic beverage, I get something with a much higher alcohol content that's way more shelf stable. And that's how distillation found favor all around the world at roughly the same time. And so shochu and awamori, it's important to realize, are also national beverages of Japan. They are classified as such by the government. They are also called kokushu. And for me, they're some of the most, they're Japan's best kept secrets. One really crazy thing about shochu and awamori is that every year since about 2003, 2004, which is right around when I moved to Japan, just a little after, shochu and awamori have outsold sake in Japan every year. So they're a massive part of the economy, and yet they're Japan's best kept culinary secret because they aren't really sold that much outside of Japan yet. But that's going to change.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. And what's even more interesting about that is like, wow, like it sells more than sake for like the past 19 years. And like, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you mentioned before, like a past conversation that apparently it's actually produced more than tequila from Mexico.
Yeah, yeah, right. There is more shochu produced in Japan than tequila in Mexico. And yet nearly 2/3 of tequila leaves Mexico. Much of it's exported to the United States, but less than 0.1% of shochu and awamori ever leave Japan. So it's just this massive component of the Japanese economic machine and culinary culture that's hiding in plain sight. And that for me has always been very interesting and very amusing, and also concurrently quite frustrating, just that it's so hard to get people outside of Japan to pay attention.
Sweet. Well, this podcast is the first step, baby. That's right, indeed. Even though a man's been on dozens of them before and hosts a couple of his own.
Cheers. I appreciate all. I will take all the help I can get, Dom, because it's an uphill climb.
Oh yeah, man. And heck, even I think part of, I guess, part of your mission for that, you actually created a handbook. If I'm not mistaken, what was that? 2020, the handbook was created for
That
Shochu.
yeah, thanks. That was the second. It's not technically a second edition, it's an updated first edition. The book called the Shochu Handbook was published in 2014 originally, and then was expanded essentially in 2020. And it's a it's a book that is pretty much what one would expect for an introduction to this spirits class. Talks about the history of the drinks and how they're made, how they're enjoyed in Japan, and also gives a lot of people have commented that the last chapter is actually really useful for when they come to Japan, because it's a little index or glossary of words and expressions that you might use when you're visiting a watering hole here in Japan once the border opens back up.
Sweet. All right, something to look forward to, because that's definitely on my one of my bucket list items to visit Japan. So definitely.
Oh, you've
So,
never been before?
oh nah, never been, but definitely will be in the future. Gonna speak it into existence and make plans for it. Hopefully, this evil virus gets in permanent hibernation. Hopefully.
Yeah, and we need the quarantine to be trimmed quite a bit, because that's a little bit of a downer when you're coming here for a vacation and you have to spend the first however many days in a tiny hotel room with no exposure to the outside world until they truly trust that you are not a biological threat. Yeah, but it's gotten better. Last year, when after traveling to the States on business, I had to spend 14 days in quarantine. And then this year, I was just in the States in April and came back earlier this month, and it was only 3 days. So it was getting better. Things are looking up.
Sweet. That's what I'm talking about. The looking up and then looking north, baby. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So, my goodness, man. So, with all of this wonderful knowledge a man has about shochu and awamori, like, my goodness, man, is there a question that you wish you'd be asked more often when you're on these podcasts spreading the good word of SNA?
A question that um, I think is important for folks in the States to ask is, how are soju from Korea and shochu from Japan different?
Oh, wow. Okay. Sweet. Enlighten us, my man.
Well, this is a really confusing one for American consumers. There is, and this is, how do I put this delicately without pissing anyone off? So it's California's fault. I'm gonna just say that. So in California, they amended the liquor license laws so that they can't what's the best way to put it? There's two liquor licenses that you can get if you open a restaurant or whatever, a bar. You got two different liquor licenses essentially that you can try and get a hold of. Now, the easy one is we'll call a soft liquor license, and that's a beer and wine license. It's cheaper. They're not as limited by district, and it's just a lot easier to acquire one. Beer and wine licenses, most restaurants have them. Obviously, you want to serve beer and wine, you need a license to do so. If you want to have a full bar, then you need a much more difficult to procure and much more expensive license in California. It's every state's a little different. So I'm speaking exclusively about California here. Now, what happened was, because spirits can only be sold on this full bar license, and it's quite cost prohibitive and just from a regulatory perspective, very onerous to obtain, there was some consternation in the Korean expat community back in the 90s, because the local drink in Korea is called soju, SOJU, which is essentially a sweetened low proof vodka, is I think a pretty good way to put it. And it goes really well when chilled with spicy Korean fare. And they really, really wanted to drink it at the local barbecue, where they go to eat and where they go to enjoy time with their community. But they couldn't, because it's a spirit. And these Korean restaurants did not have the resources or the need of a full bar license. So they organized and they petitioned the state, and they got the state to change the soft license to accommodate soju. So you can serve this spirit, this low proof spirit, on a beer and wine license if it has a couple of key things on it. Number one, the maximum ABV is 24% alcohol. Now, most of the green bottle soju that you see in the States is actually less than 20, but it can legally on that license go as high as 24. The second thing is that soju, S-O-J-U, which is very clearly a Korean cultural commodity, it must be printed on the label, on the front label. And if you do so, then you can sell it, you can market it and sell it to restaurants that have only a soft license and not a full bar license. So back in the 90s, or maybe the early aughts, the Korean shochu industry spotted a loophole. And they said, so all we have to do is dilute our spirit a little bit and write soju on the front label somewhere, and then we can sell these bottles to all of the sushi restaurants and the Japanese restaurants around California who would love to have some of our stuff. And so they did so. So, and this is a big old self-inflicted, this is an own goal right here of pretty epic proportions. What certain, especially large makers of Japanese shochu have done is that they have confused consumers into thinking that soju and shochu are the same thing. Why? Because it says soju right on the damn label, right? Even though it was made in Japan. So there's a lot of people out there, and I deal with this all the time, people who think they've tried shochu before, but they haven't. They've been drinking green bottle stuff, the little green bottles, and they've been producing pretty epic hangovers, and it does not do the Japanese shochu industry any favors. And those bottles, those mislabeled bottles, don't just stay in California. They're shipped all across the country. And so you've just, because of this one soft license law in California state, you've got these mislabeled shochu bottles even in Vermont, where I'm from. So it's effectively misinformed or miseducated generations of consumer in the States. And sidecar to all of that, what I would like to have as the foundational difference between them for people to understand is that these drinks are nothing alike. Like I said before, Korean soju is essentially a sweetened vodka, and Japanese shochu has so many rules around how it can be made. Number one, it can't be column distilled like a vodka. It has to be traditionally pot distilled or atmospheric distilled. So the ABV tends to be a lot lower than vodka. And you can't add anything to it other than water and thyme. There's no sweeteners allowed. And thyme, T-I-M-E, not T-H-Y-M-E. That would be kind of wild to add thyme to spirit. But you can't add anything else. No sweeteners, no color stabilizers, no savory acids or anything, nothing. It's what you have is what you get. It's a very difficult drink to make well. And so it's just a much more traditional style. The column still, as it were, is a relatively recent invention. It's a little over it's been used in the spirits industry for well over 100 years now, but in Japan, roughly 100 years. And so it's a much younger style than the traditional stuff that when we talk about shochu and awamori in Japan, we're talking about that traditional stuff, the old school styles. And so in the States, and geez, I just hope these labels aren't finding their way to any other countries. Please look at where the product was made. All right. Because if it was made in Korea, that is not shochu. And if it was made in Japan, that is not soju. All right. Japan makes shochu, S-H-O-C-H-U. Just pronounce it like those two verbs, S-H-O-W and C-H-E-W, and you're 99% of the way there. But that's a tough one. And I spend a lot of time explaining these things to people. And you can ask people out there like, oh, have you tried shochu before? And they'll say, yeah. And then you follow up with, well, where did you try it? And, oh, I had it at the Korean barbecue place. It's like, okay, yeah, well, then you have not had shochu, you had soju.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that the two words rhyme either. That does not make anything easier. So, but yeah, that's part of the uphill battle.
Sweet. Definitely good to know. Definitely good to know. It's like, hey, one's a J, you're jumping. The other one is a C, you're chewing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's right. I just realized your name starts with C, so that's why you're a Sochu expert. That's right.
That's yeah. Well, yeah. Fortunate. I don't know how easy it would be to pronounce my name with the Christopher. Yeah. So it's a silent H in that case, I guess. But
So Christopher.
yeah, it's almost a T though, isn't it? Sounds like a Tris. Yeah. I don't know if I've met anybody named that before, but maybe that's my new nickname.
There you go. That's right. Put it in a romance novel, folks. That's right.
I like it. Yeah. Having a character misnamed after me, that would be awesome.
That's right indeed. That's right indeed. So my goodness, man. So since my man's been on a tour and you're expert at this and educating the folks, like I didn't even know that. And it's actually, I guess, in a way, on one side, it's like a, I guess, temporary good business move for money purposes to get more money to for exports. But on the bad side, it's like, oh well, let's make sure we kill the experience for everybody else and kind of hold them back from that true experience. It's like giving somebody imitation crab meat in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a total buzzkill, but it's something that just been trying to wean the industry off of it, but I don't think that they see enough potential in the US market yet to care a whole lot about it, to care enough to go back and revise all their labels. And then, the other thing that's fair is like they have business relationships in California that they won't be able to pursue anymore by not mislabeling their products intentionally. So there's gonna have to be enough upside to the rest of the country. And there are some huge markets, obviously, outside of California, but there's really going to have to be that tipping point where it becomes like, okay, it probably is worth forsaking those soft license accounts in California just so that we don't piss off or anger a bunch of our other accounts across the country who actually do want to do things in a more authentic way and don't want to play the loophole game just to satisfy California's thirst, so to speak. Quite frankly, I'm hoping that more and more people will start to really geek out about these drinks in the coming years and apply further pressure to those specific makers who are exploiting that loophole, and we can kind of shame them into ceasing and desisting.
Shame. Shame. The
Hey,
shame.
it's kind of a valuable tool over here.
Oh yeah, I've heard. So my goodness, man. So heck, actually, was gonna ask the usual silly question, but hey, and that just popped in my head, and I probably should have asked this earlier. But my goodness, so what are the what are probably the two or three major differences of doing business in Japan versus doing business in the U.S.?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I've probably expressed this somewhere before, but it often rears its head now and again. I'm operating in a situation where I help manage a trade company, an alcohol trading company in Fukuoka, Japan, down in Kyushu, and then simultaneously another trade company in New York. And while they aren't financially related in any way, they do depend on each other for survival. And because we have the two diversely located teams at different time zones, different countries, the whole 9 yards, it's really interesting when one team wants something from the other team, or one team has a question about how to do something from the other. The most common or the most fortunately we've taught the team to stop trying to pursue these things. But the team in the States will often be like, the attitude is like, well, it doesn't hurt to ask. There's like, we want to see if they're willing to, one of the suppliers is willing to do this for us, or compromise on this point. No, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? And that assumption is so wrong for Japan. Just asking can hurt the relationship. And obviously it depends on what you're asking about, but the assumption that, oh, it never hurts to ask, that needs to be left out of your mind when you're doing business in Japan. You need to calculate very carefully the other party's reaction to asking about something that's already been agreed upon, something that's already been negotiated, and then you want to tweak it a little bit. So that's a big difference. You really have to consider the context in all of your communication, and you have to consider how the other people are going to feel, react to the things that are said and the things that aren't said. So it's a quote unquote high context society, a high context form of communication, and that is certainly true in the business world. Meaning that I look at just the Japanese language itself is really interesting, because you have, well, when compared to American English anyway, you have this many words and a largely commensurate amount of meaning. So there's not a lot of variation between the number of words that are used and how much meaning is intended. Whereas in Japan, you have this many words, but then the actual meaning is so much larger than that. There's so much that is implied or unstated, but is supposed to be understood, that just can be a complete minefield for companies trying to come into Japan to do business. And that's one thing that's just a really interesting, often miscommunication that happens between the team in Japan and the team in the States. So fortunately, we've got enough very, very intelligent people on both sides to be able to navigate these things successfully. But we have, had to relearn some of these lessons over and over again to avoid making the same mistakes 3 times or 4 times. So that's one really big one. Another big difference is the employment situation is completely different. In the States, you can hire and fire pretty much at will. And in Japan, you can hire whenever you want, but getting rid of people can be a right pain in the butt. It's an employment situation where the employee holds most of the cards. And if they don't want to be let go, there are legal mechanisms that they can employ to completely derail your business. And I'm not disparaging employment rights or employee rights at all. I think it's important. I think it's very important to protect the rights of the employees, at least on a level on par with the corporation itself. However, you have an entire economy that is scared to hire people full time, because if it doesn't work out, it's impossible to get rid of them. So there's a pretty intense part-time and contract employment situation over here, which protects the businesses from having to, just protects the businesses from something not working out the way that they wanted it to. And unfortunately, really makes for an unstable employment situation for a large swath of the society. So that's another really big difference. You have to be very, very considerate about who you take on and what their role is going to be and how you keep them engaged in that role. Because if you're unhappy with their performance, but they don't want to leave, there's not a whole lot you can do.
Man, oh man, definitely good to know indeed. Good to know indeed. It's like, hey, trees are awesome. Like, oh, crap. They said trees are awesome. Trees bring back bad memories. We must forget this US of A company. They offend us. It's like, darn it.
Right.
It's like
Yeah,
what happened?
yeah,
Miscommunication, though. It was a minefield.
yeah. Oh, it's yeah, it's fun. It's really fun. Fortunately, it is getting easier just because I think there's a lot more people with the cultural IQ to be able to work it well from both sides. But it, you know, it's just business is business, and it's all about trust, and especially over here, it's all about relationships, and it's so easy to knock one of those relationships off its foundation if you're not careful, and then it can be really hard to repair. It would take a long time to repair. So yeah, tread carefully, folks.
There we go. Tread softly. That's right. Jackie Chan, a Rush Hour 2. Tread softly. That's right,
Okay,
indeed. We
big
can't
stick.
be like. That's right. All the sticks. So, my goodness, a fun question I've been loving to ask guests recently, and that is if your wonderful book, the Shochu Handbook, if it was a food, what would it be and why?
Wow. If the shochu handbook was a food, I think it would be I think it would be a pizza with all of the fixins, all of like a supreme pizza just has everything on it. And that's just be I think that's in a comment on how diverse the ingredients used to make the drink are, and how important how important food pizza is to pretty much everyone on the planet, but how important shochu and awamori are to Japanese culinary culture. I think there's a serious synergy there. So yeah, I'm gonna go with a, a pizza with all the trimmings.
Sweet. That's right, indeed. About time we started getting some more pizza answers on this podcast. I was surprised at first, like, oh, wow, I'm surprised nobody said pizza yet. But it's like, oh, yeah, all the trimmings, baby. That's right, indeed. The whole pie. That's
That's
right,
right.
indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right. The cheese rises to the top, baby, metaphorically. So my goodness, we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive, and that is if you're to wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but you're still in the current year of 2022 with all of your knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
That's a great question. I actually This is one that I think about a lot, and I think about the things that the tools that I don't personally have, and I would have spent a lot more time getting to the age of 25 working in computers, and I think both equally coding and then also graphic design. I think you can really the obviously you can hire people and that's great, but there's so much speed and agility that can be added to your business, and so much kind of keeping your staying in the conversation in the moment if you have those skills inside of yourself to be able to do all the computer work or do some of it anyway. And whether it's troubleshooting or whether it's designing social media posts or whatever, I really wish I would have my geez teenage self focusing much more solidly on developing those skills and making sure that at the age of 25 I was in a position to use Adobe Premiere and create amazing videos, and go into the back end of a WordPress website and be able to completely change the I'm talking Ruby on Rails, I'm talking Java, I'm talking simple CSS and HTML, but just having the background in that to know how to go about fixing something or changing something and not having to wait 10 days for somebody else to do it, that would be huge. And that's something that I have tried to rectify over time, but I just wish I had started earlier.
Boom. That's what I'm talking about. Good, solid advice, baby. And something different, too, because a lot of folks don't consider this. Like, hey, learn that technology, baby. Heck, even, reminds me of a past guest, Tony Wadley. He mentioned how his favorite book of all time was actually a coding book that taught him how to
Hmm.
code in HTML to build websites, and that eventually let him become a side hustle millionaire because he built a website from scratch. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, man, solid advice, dude. Like, yeah, man, that technology, baby. Learn that technology.
And it's easy to get that knowledge these days. I mean, one thing I've been using, and this is, you can go online and do these classes. I think one of them is called Code Academy or something like that. And so I have been studying. I'm trying to up my skills. I just really wish I had started that much younger, because I'd be way further ahead right now.
Heck yeah, indeed, man. Heck yeah, indeed. Well, we definitely got to have you back on the podcast. So, my goodness. So, for those who want to keep in touch with you in the meantime and follow your journey, what's the best way for folks to do so?
Thank you. If you're interested in hearing more about shochu and awamori specifically, then I'm very easy to track down on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm sorry, I'm not really on TikTok yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm just trying to figure out the culture of that platform before I really do anything with it. And you can also, if you want to learn more about Japanese spirits in general, not only about shochu and awamori, but basically everything. So whiskey, gin, rum, everything. Then please take a look at a podcast called Japan Distilled, which appears a couple times a month, not nearly as it, getting the content, not getting the content nearly as quickly as you, Dom, but it's got little nuggets of useful information about spirits if that's something that you want to learn more about. And yeah, I guess that's it. My book, the Shochu Handbook, is and I apologize, exclusively available through Amazon. And that's because I am working on another book pitch, and I knew that they were going to ask me to take the Shochu Handbook offline for a while when this next book about shochu is published, just to give it all of the elbow room it needs. And the easiest way for me to do that was to go one channel, one network with the book, rather than having it out there and in all sorts of different or accessible through multiple vendors. But yeah, enjoy your journey, everyone. Now that you've heard about shochu, go out there and try and find some, and find the one you like. And if you have any questions, look me up. I'm very easy to track down.
Well, there you have it, folks. Follow the CP, baby. That's right. Gonna put the link to his site and all the other good stuff in the show notes, indeed. And looks like it's gonna be a super special, awesome book for the next publication version, baby. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So be on the lookout for that too, indeed. So, any parting words before we close up shop, my friend?
I would say, and this is probably cliched to a certain extent, so I apologize for that, but there's no time like right now, and it's never too late. And stop waiting for other people to give you permission to do things. You just need to do it. And I think that's one thing I had to figure out the hard way in terms of starting these businesses, was stop waiting for other people to tell you that it's a good idea. Stop waiting for permission. Just if you know it's important to you and you're inspired by the thought of it, go do it.
How's it going, you super special, awesome human? Since you made it to the end of this episode, it looks like you really enjoyed yourself. Since you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share with at least 3 people in your network and tell them what you really liked about this episode. Heck, even shoot myself or the guest an email and let them know what you liked most about this interview, so that way they can stay inspired to keep pushing out great work.